Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be unto you, the mercy of Allah and His blessings. Dear friends, thank you for joining me. Uh, and this is the second part, okay, of my presentations on the 12 differences between the Bible and the Quran. Um, if you watch the first part, uh, I pointed out that the Bible is a collection of books and that the Quran is one book. Okay, this is number two of the 12 differences in this little booklet. The Bible was compiled over a period exceeding 13 centuries. The Quran was compiled over a period of 23 years. It took over 13 centuries to put the Bible together. The books of the Old Testament were written during the period between 1300 BC, BC. At any rate, you know what BC stands for, and 100 BC. The books of the New Testament were written during the first and second centuries of the Christian era. I believe that's a bit inaccurate. The second century may be longer than that. But you can actually look it up on Wikipedia, and you'll find that the books were written and compiled over a period. Actually, the the form of the New Testament that we have now, there was the Council of Nicaea, if that's the proper pronunciation, which took place in the fourth century, I believe. So it took longer than that. The term Old Testament was devised in 170 AD. AD stands for Anno Domini. I don't like that abbreviation, but at least it makes it clear. And it's Latin for the year of our Lord. People who say that believe that the Son of Mary, that they call Jesus Christ, is their Lord. Okay, and that He is the Son of the one who created the entire vastness of the cosmos and the higher reality beyond that. And Subhanallah, that's what I say. That's what Allah says. Subhanallah, that Allah alone is perfect and has no need of the sorts of things that people believe. Um, if He wants to forgive, He just forgives. He loves to forgive. No big drama, uh, no passion. The passion, the story of the passion. Man is crucified and suffers and all of this so He can forgive us, so that we can be forgiven. You need a Christian to explain Christian beliefs to you. And I wish we could have a down to earth, honest discussion about the differences in what we believe. This is actually in the Quran for us to come together and discuss these things and the curse of the Almighty on those who lie. But the term Old Testament was devised in 170 AD. Nowadays, people use the initials CE for Christian era to distinguish the old writings from the new writings and to announce, as far as Christians are concerned, a new age with the coming of Jesus Christ and therefore a new testament. A testament is a covenant or a contract. Without counting the oral sources that predate the centuries, the earliest Old Testament writings that predate by centuries the earliest Old Testament writings, and without counting the medieval scriptures accepted by the Ethiopian church, the Bible was compiled over a period that exceeded 13 centuries. Okay? Um, I believe that certain statements in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew scriptures, such as the first one in the book of Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's the King James Version. Himmel in German is both singular and plural, I think. And so when the people who put the King James Version together, they adopted the singular interpretation. But other English translations say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I believe that that was came down in oral form before it was written, possibly centuries before it was written down. And I have a whole essay planned on that. Uh, and so, Allah willing, I'll come back to that in another presentation. It took 23 years to put the Quran together. The Quran was compiled between 610 AD and 630, 632. Let me get my little magnifying glass. And 632 AD, during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad, he lived between 570 and 632. He memorized it in its entirety and had it written down. Many of his followers also memorized it, and those that knew how to write wrote down various portions of it. When the Quran was complete, several of the Prophet's companions had memorized the entire book. A standard written copy was compiled in 633 AD. And I have various biographical sources, and inshallah, Allah willing, um, I'll give you a link, okay, to the various books, a couple of dozen books that are sources for this information. Okay, um, let me say a few things. We know, 13 centuries. Of course, for us, that's a long time. And we should think in terms of human life and history. Things are happening, people are living, and we have some idea of the various events and that, and nations and empires that came and went during this time. One of the problems that we have, and I hope I can be brief with this because we're given images, and this is really important to Christians, images, pictures. And most of the images that we're given are of light skinned people like Europeans. Uh, Virtually all of the people who lived in the Middle East and certainly in all of Africa were dark skinned people, what we would call black people, even though, of course, you look at my face, I'm brown, right? I'm a black man, my skin is brown, just like white people. Usually their skin is pink. I've never seen a white person. I saw a fellow who was nearly dead with tuberculosis. What do they call it when you have no iron in your blood? Um, Anemic. And his skin was not white; it was yellow because protoplasm is a yellowish color. Without the blood, it's a yellowish color. So anyway, the thing is that people were brown and darker than brown. You talk about the Assyrians, you're talking about the children of Israel, you're talking about the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, let alone the Egyptians and the people of Arabia. We're talking about black people. Okay, the people of those regions became light skinned as a result between approximately 711 and all the way into the beginning of the 20th century. Millions upon millions upon millions of Europeans, light skinned people, were captured, and sold into slavery in North Africa and the Middle East. Okay, 1.5 million in the 18th and 19th centuries alone. I got this from Wikipedia. And the people of those regions, especially the Arabs, they married their slaves. They married the women that there was the slaves and the sons of, the Arab definition of an Arab is if your father is an Arab, you are an Arab, period. You are not half Arab, multi-ethnic, or any of that sort of business. If your father is an Arab, you are an Arab, okay? Your mother could be Chinese. She could be from the Congo region. She could be from Finland. It doesn't matter. If your father is an Arab, you are 100% Arab. Okay. Um, so anyway, that's how those people became light skinned because they were intermarrying the light skinned Europeans. And the word Slav and the word slave are actually the same word. The same word. That's how many Slavs were sold into slavery. I'm thinking about their German neighbors, who just, love to abuse their Slavic nations and neighbors and sold them into slavery. And so their name became synonymous with servitude, Slav and slave. Um, so anyway, those were not light-skinned people like you see pictures of the prophets and all of those people, or, like they're light-skinned like Europeans. No way, not at all, not. Um, so we're dealing with people who were born and lived and died generation after generation, passing down the scriptures. Um, and so this was sacred, and quite often they lived among people who hated what they were up to. And those who believed, and I say those who believed because the children of Israel they were bad. I mean, I've read the Old Testament. They were bad, and I mean, they made altars to Baal and sacrificed their children, killed their own babies to trying to please Marduk. Jeremiah got on their case about that. Um, so anyway, but the scriptures they managed to save them. The Tanakh, as it is called, I put it at some other part of the room, but they actually maintained it. I read about this, and I say, wow, that's quite an achievement. They kept those scriptures in the form that they were put together so many centuries ago, 25 centuries ago, I believe, and they've held on to them in that form. That form wasn't the original, but they kept it that way for all of these 25 centuries. So that's amazing. Um, so when we come down to the Christian centuries, there are all kinds of writings in the early centuries of the time at the time of Jesus Christ. Um, and some of them were put into the New Testament and some of them not. And there were the letters of Paul. And I need to write a book about Paul because, to a large extent, what we think of as Christianity is a result of the work of Paul. Um, but he wrote letters, and not even the letters of Paul have been saved in their original form. None of the scriptures, none of them, have been saved in their original form. So everything that we have are reconstructed in one way, form, or fashion. And then it took centuries for the Christians, for the Western, well, for the Christian church in Europe to agree to what constituted the New Testament. Okay, so that's what we have now. And the Christians say that the Bible is the Word of God. I'm not sure what they understand that to mean, but the book of Revelation is a letter from a man named John to the seven churches of Asia. Asia being what we now call Turkey. The Turks migrated out of Central Asia to that area and took it over and married the women. That's why they don't look like the people back in Central Asia, because they married the women who were living in that part of the world. It was all men. They migrated into that area and took it over and married the women. Um, Not the only time in history that sort of thing has happened. I mean, that's a story of Rome. There's a painting, I think, it's called The Rape of the Sabine Women. The Romans just took these women who were living, minding their business. They took, I don't know what they did to the men, but they took the women. Um, but at any rate, the seven churches of Asia, and it's a letter from John to so when Christians say this is the word of God, what exactly do they mean? Okay, so we need to understand this when we say that the Quran is a message that came down. This is the language that I'm translating, of course. Anzala, came down, was sent down by the creator of the heavens and the earth to Muhammad. Allah sent Gabriel, the same Gabriel who went to Mary and told her she was going to have a baby, right? Allah sent Gabriel to Muhammad with the message. Okay, so the Quran, none of it are the words, none of the words are the words of Muhammad. All of them, Muhammad faithfully repeated the words that came to him from the angel Gabriel. Uh, for whatever reason, Allah Himself never spoke directly to Muhammad. He spoke to Moses. I don't know, and it seems as though he spoke to Abraham. I'm not sure from what I've read, but he did speak to Moses, and and uh, but he did not speak directly to Muhammad. He sent Gabriel. But for that matter, we know from what we've read that Allah sent Gabriel to Mary. No evidence that Allah spoke directly to Mary, let alone did the other thing that Christians say he did. I mean, it's like, whoa, no, no, he didn't even speak to Mary. He sent Gabriel, and Gabriel spoke to Mary. Okay, but at any rate, the Quran, over a period of 23 years, when Muhammad first heard the words, right? Iqra bismi rabbika ladhi khalaq. Hear this word iqra, iqra. It's really hard to translate that into English. I mean, we translate it as read, but Quran comes from that word, and it means read, recite. It means both of them. It has one meaning. It means both of them. Read, recite. If you're reading, like I can look at this page and read it. That's not Quran. I can read it out loud, and if I don't understand it, that's not Quran. I need to understand what I'm reading, have some understanding, and recite it out loud. The Quran is actually rhythmic. It rhymes. It has a symphonic structure, as I call it symphonic. That's my background. I have a PhD. I mean, I'm all that. When it comes to the mastery of the symphonic music. And all praise is due to Allah. I'm not praising myself. I'm saying I got it, and Allah actually commands us to, for bima. I can't remember the exact quotation, but if Allah blesses us with something, we need to put it out there. Okay. Um, so the Quran is symphonic. You got to recite it. You've got to recite it. The rhythm, the rhyme. I mean, it's awesome. Um, so Muhammad thought he was going crazy. He was in a cave, uh, meditating and praying because his people were in trouble. He wasn't the only one concerned about this. There was a whole movement. They're trying to get back to the ways of Abraham because their people were crazy. They were just, they had idols that they made with their own hands, and hundreds of them, and they sacrificed their children. They killed their baby girls. For some reason, a man would feel humiliated if his wife came forth with a baby girl, and they would bury them alive in the sand. Insane. So this was what these people were in, all kinds of stuff. And so, there was a movement, trying to get back to the ways of Abraham. And they knew one thing, that Abraham hated false gods. He hated idols. He was a servant of the one who created everything that exists, of the heavens and the earth. And they wanted to get back to that, but that's just about all they knew. He hated idols, and he wanted to serve the master, the creator of the heavens and the earth. So Muhammad, he had a wife and children, but he was getting up at night and climbing this mountain and going and sitting in a cave and praying and meditating. And one night he heard this voice, Iqra. Heard a voice, so he came back down from the mountain, and he was scared. He was trembling, and his wife threw a cloak over him and everything, and he told her what had happened. And she had a cousin who was a Christian. Christians weren't allowed to live in Mecca, but she had a cousin, and she knew before Muhammad knew what was happening, that her husband was receiving revelation. And she took him to her cousin, and her cousin was an old man, and he knew what was happening, and he was sad because he was too old to live to see Muhammad go through all the things that the prophets had gone through. I mean, persecutions and all of this kind of stuff. But he wanted to see the drama, but he knew that Muhammad had been chosen. And for some reason, in that part of the world, all the way from what is now Iraq and Syria and everything, people were expecting a prophet. They were expecting a prophet. There were people who actually migrated, who moved. I mean, individuals who moved to Arabia. There was a man named Salman, who was an Iranian. He was known as Solomon al-Farsi, and he went to Arabia because he had heard there was going to be a prophet. And he got kidnapped and enslaved, and he happened to be a slave in Medina when the refugees from Mecca, the Hijrah, arrived. And there he was. He just happened to be in the right place, even though he had been enslaved. And the Muslims helped him to be emancipated, to plant a number of trees so that the man who had him would let him go. Um, and then there was a man named Zayd. There were three people named Zayd that I've learned about, and one of them lived before Muhammad. And he actually took refuge in a cave outside of Mecca because he hated the way the people of Mecca were living, and they actually didn't want him to come back to town, and so he migrated up to Syria and whatnot. And he heard about a prophet, and so he was coming back, and he got murdered on the way. Dangerous traveling by yourself in those days, in those regions. Um, but at any rate. Um, so Muhammad, he received more and more of these messages over the years. He had more and more people following him, and so over a period of 23 years, there were more and more people who had memorized. Ultimately, thousands who had learned the Quran, memorized it. Some of them wrote it down. Mostly, they were illiterate people, so they had poetry, lots of poetry. His wife Aisha, that he married after Khadija. Khadija was his only wife during her lifetime. Um, After he became the leader of a community, he had several wives, which is common. I mean, people say the Bible, what Solomon had, what 300. I mean, this is crazy. How can you have that many? If you visit each one of them once a year, they who did they would remember? Oh, you're my husband. I remember you. But no, actually, Muhammad had perhaps at most 12. Um, and at a certain point, Allah told him that don't take any more. Even if you divorce any of the women, don't take any more. Don't that's it. But of course, if women were given some, people gave slaves as gifts. There were a couple of women. The emperor of Ethiopia gave him a couple of women. Um, so Muhammad normally, if people were captives after a war, or if they were given to him, he offered them, well, would you like to marry me? Asked them, and if there was a Jewish woman who people had been defeated by the Muslims, and normally, people who were defeated would become slaves. That's what happens. The men are not prisoners of war; they're slaves. The women and children, everybody, they're slaves. The people who taken them, and of course, they're not supposed to be treated badly. I mean, what happened in the United States shouldn't even be called. I mean, it's ridiculous what happened here. But at any rate, the thing is that the Jewish woman, he said, well, would you like to marry me? And she said, I think she said no, but she may have said she'd think about it. So she was a part of his household and everything. People can't just live someplace, the way American children do. We just live with our parents, and we think we're not supposed to do anything. you know, I mean, but I didn't grow up that way. One night, my mother got me up out of the bed in the middle of the night, because I was supposed to wash the dishes, and I went to bed without washing the dishes. So, everybody in the household has things to do. So at any rate, she changed her mind, or she made up her mind and decided that she would accept to be the wife of Muhammad. Okay, there were slave women given to him. He, asked them if they want to marry him, and he did. So I mean, if more slave women had been given to them, he would probably have made the same offer. Um, and Allah said, there's an expression in the Quran, what your right hands possess. If other women had come to him, um, he would have been free to marry them. But he didn't marry them because he was a sex maniac. You know, he was trying to lead a nation of people. And sometimes he married people to cement a relationship with another group of people, right? And normally in history, all the way up until the 19th century, uh, men would marry the women of more powerful nations. Okay, this is the way they would move up in the world. But Muhammad would marry the women of a tribe. I hate to use that word, but let's say a nation of people that the Muslims had defeated in battle. and he would marry the woman, and that would convince that people that Muhammad was not trying to climb up on their backs. He wasn't trying to do that. Um, and he was trying to demonstrate to people that I'm not trying to take stuff away from you. I'm not trying to enslave you. I'm not, I'm offering you an opportunity to accept a better way of life. Okay. Um, but at any rate, I'm saying that over 23 years, he received more and more messages. Quite a few of these messages were topical. I mean, they were about immediate situations that were happening. Somebody accused Aisha of committing adultery and everything. And Allah sent a message down saying those people are just slanderers. Don't let that upset you. And this was, I mean, how is she going to know if she had committed adultery? When is she going to know if she was a young woman? Yeah. When is she going to know if she's pregnant? But Allah sent the message down, telling Muhammad, don't worry about it. Nothing happened. These people are just talking, and they should shut up. Uh, but at any rate, even Aisha's own father, Abu Bakr, was suspicious of her. It was really a difficult time. But the message came down from Allah. Nothing happened, right? These people are just talking. And so a lot of these were topical. Some of them were critical of Muhammad. I had wanted to talk for 10 minutes, and now it's over 25 minutes. But inshallah, if you want to listen to me, you can always turn it off, come back later, what have you. Um, there was a man who was a follower of Muhammad, but his father um, was a disbeliever, right? And when the man's father died, of course, it was his father. He loved him, and he wanted Muhammad to pray over his grave. And Muhammad agreed to do that. But Umar, one of Muhammad's closest followers, was beside himself with exasperation. I mean, he actually said to Muhammad, you are the prophet of Allah, aren't you? Aren't you the prophet of Allah? How can you pray over the grave of this disbeliever, this enemy of the Muslims, the enemy of Allah? And so, but Muhammad went and did it anyway. And then the message, the revelation came down to Muhammad and said, don't do that. Don't do it. So there are parts of the Quran that are very critical of Muhammad. He did something, and Allah sent a message down saying, "Don't do that." Okay. One of my favorite surahs is it the 80th? The 80th surah of the Quran is called Abasa, which means he frowned. He frowned and turned away because a blind man had come to him. Um, and Muhammad, he wasn't having it. The blind man wanted to ask questions. No, he was going to see some important people, right? He wanted to see some important people. Maybe they'll accept the message. And so Allah told, well, my understanding of that surah, the entire surah, is that, it takes only maybe 5 minutes to recite it. But my in that, to me, that surah is Allah is telling Muhammad, do that again, and I will beat you to a pulp. I mean, it says, "Qutla insan," qutla, drop dead. That's qutla insan, drop dead, man. Don't do that. The blind man wanted to ask you a question, and you want to go to these idiots who think they don't need anything, right? Don't do that. But at any rate, that's just my interpretation. You know, uh, I don't have the chance to sit down with my Muslim brothers and talk about this. So at any rate, what I'm trying to bring home is that 23 years was the last 23 years of Muhammad's life. He started receiving revelation when he was 40, and then he passed away when he was 63. The Quran was complete. He left the complete Quran just as we have it today with his companions. Okay, no ifs, ands, or buts. He had memorized it. Many of them had memorized it. I believe it was thousands of them had memorized the entire Quran. That's how much they loved it. They my goodness, they loved it. You have no idea. And so we have this book, and it's what when you see people standing up in Salah, which is not prayer. Salah is purification. Okay, people standing up in Salah, and you hear the Imam reciting. Everything he's reciting is the Quran. Everything. Everything he's reciting is the Quran. Nothing but the Quran. And it has been a habit, a custom to recite the entire Quran during the month of Ramadan. The Muslims standing up. I've had that privilege, that blessing of standing up behind men. They call a man is called a hafiz, who has memorized the entire Quran, standing up at night in the evening during Ramadan for almost 30 days. I mean, I would have gone, but there was something else happening, so they didn't have it. But 28 or 29 days, hearing them recite more and more of the Quran until in the entire month they've recited the entire Quran. And this has been going on for 14 centuries, okay? And if the Hafiz, one reciting, makes a mistake or deviates or has a memory lapse, we say, Subhanallah, and correct him. I participated in this process. I've stood up behind the Hafiz. He was from Pakistan, and he made a mistake. And I said, Subhanallah, and corrected him. And this is how, what NASA calls multiple redundancy, right? You have a spacecraft that's going out there, hundreds of millions of miles from Earth. If something goes wrong, they can't correct it. So they have backup systems and backup systems for the backup systems, multiple redundancy. Well, this is the Quran. You have people who have memorized the Quran, all over the world. And when we go to Salah, some of us are standing in the front row to make sure that we can, correct the Imam if he makes a mistake. Multiple redundancies, and has been preserved for 14 centuries. You can go to China, South America, Indonesia, Washington State, Vancouver in Canada, everywhere, and you stand up behind an imam and he's reciting exactly the same Quran that was left behind by Muhammad. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So inshallah, tomorrow I will talk about the Bible tends to be arranged chronologically, right? The Bible is given to us as though it's some kind of a history book, right? In the beginning, it begins, and then it ends with the apocalypse, and the apocalypse, like the end of the world and everything. The Quran is not arranged chronologically. So we can talk about that, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessing be upon you and the mercy of Allah and all of that good stuff, okay? So thank you for joining me, and I'm going to put information in the comments. And if you have some extra change, please, I can definitely use it. I'm working here. You may not think so, but I am working, and I'm trying to set up connections with the Substack and Patreon and whatnot, so this can be more regular. Okay, so Allah willing. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.